So no.
I'm live. Okay.
Should I move your jacket?
No, it's fine. I can see you coming down the. Okay. Okay.
I figure I'll probably go away when like the real people show up. But hello, you look so pretty. It's gonna be wonderful. Okay. Oh, Jeff says hello. Good luck.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Figure I'll probably go away when like the real people show up. But hello, you look so pretty. It's gonna be wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
You might want to mute your YouTube page.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Figure I'll probably go away when like the real people show up. But hello, you look so pretty. It's gonna be wonderful. I can hear everything, and you're not gonna be able to hear you.
Okay.
Did you mute it? Okay, because I started hearing that whole thing on the delay, and then I couldn't hear you.
Thank you, Jess.
You're welcome.
I should have made you a host too, so you could do the breakout room, but I think I'll be okay.
No, you'll be all right. You and Nancy sorted how that's working.
I made her a co-host, but
Perfect. That means she can at least come into your other breakout room and figure out how that's working. Oh boy, slideshow.
I'll just put it up for now.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I like that.
Oh, thanks for being here and calming my nerves.
You are so welcome. Have you had a good day? I'm trying to bake this ridiculous curry pie. I will send you pictures after. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
That sounds delicious.
Yes. Hello. We'll see how it goes. But
So if I'm here, can you see me?
I could see your shadow earlier. Yeah, I can see you a little. It's fine.
I don't think I can.
No, everyone. You put more.
Oh,
Hi.
hello.
Hi, Shalini.
That's Shalini.
You say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, your voice. Nice to hear.
Great to see you.
You too. Oh,
Lovely image there.
Mhm.
oh, thanks. Yeah, I think it's pretty.
I told Claire that as an audience member, I'll basically disappear when everybody else shows up. But
Oh, sounds good.
Mhm.
Sounds fine. I don't know how it's going to be set up. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. Yeah, you got to connect the audio.
I'm in.
Yay.
Hi, everybody. Nice to
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, Nancy.
see you. Claire, we're not getting the full benefit of your defense outfit this way.
No, like stand up and model.
I think you're missing just jeans. It's really not going to be very exciting if I stand up.
All right.
But I
say-
especially want to know about the shoes.
Mm.
Ah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I'm wearing sneakers. That's like the joy of Zoom life to me. Sneakers.
Nice. Believe me, my outfit was the last thing on my mind today.
That's funny.
Well, it's funny. Sometimes people obsess about it, right? It's funny how people process these watersheds in different ways.
I like the way you're processing it on the screen image.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, that was my sort of tranquility, was to compose slides through this
That is nice.
process.
Oh, it's lovely.
Thanks. I'm so excited to share it with you.
To wait. I have, Nancy, you've done a Zoom defense before, right? I have not, so I don't have a sense of how it'll work with people coming in or leaving and all of that stuff. But
Well, although I just did. Oh, there we go. I've got everybody back. Yeah, the key is breakout rooms. Basically,
Right.
that Claire puts the committee into a breakout room so we can go discuss and come back.
Okay. And I made you a host so you can break out of the breakout room too when it comes time. Because I don't know how that works.
I think we have
all
that
that well.
option anyway from my previous experience. I had actually expected to be whisked back, and it turned out that I was delayed because I didn't click the link myself.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's
Anna was a real trailblazer and she helped me like down to the most minute details with all of this. So we're only, live streaming because of her help. So thank you, Nancy, for suggesting.
Oh, I'm really glad. She actually sent me a copy of what I figure she sent you, just in case I ran across anyone else who needed it. And it is an amazingly thorough step-by-step breakdown of the Zoom and YouTube process.
I just
wow.
wondered what kinds of writing she's been teaching at Pitt that she could do that so well.
I'm not
Who
sure
is this?
if
I
it's
missed,
a connection.
I missed the name.
Shauna?
Ah,
Shauna McDermott.
McDermott. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, Claire, Kirsten says hi.
Oh,
She's
hi,
She's over
Kirsten.
on YouTube and she's like, oh, everybody's talking.
Oh, YouTube can already see us. I didn't think about that. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I should have warned
No,
you.
no. It's just there was all the hot gossip I was going to fill you in on,
Likewise.
Yeah, that was a concern for the breakout room too. I was like, I don't know if we want to broadcast all that, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
that I think we
Yeah.
had like a cross check to make sure that it didn't bleed over into the YouTube screen.
And
Well, maybe.
then we might sweep Claire into her own breakout room as like normally we would all gather around her outside and tell her how good it went. And yeah.
Oh,
Maybe Jess can tell us if we're unintentionally broadcasting.
I can be the YouTube checker. That seems fair. Yeah.
I
There
do
is a
think
delay, so I
based
should be
on
able to
previous-
catch you.
Yeah.
More.
I'm not worried. The other experience really did work fine. So I also did one of our job candidates for the job that has just been canceled did a remote. Yeah, I know that was the bad news of yesterday. I did a remote class that involved breakout rooms, and one of the things that also established is that the breakout room doesn't appear on the transcription of the chat, which you can get if you record. I think this is not recording, but yeah. So they've thought this out pretty well, really.
Mhm. Claire,
Fair
did you
way.
want? That reminds me. Do you want me to record it? You
Oh,
can
that
also
would be
record
so
it
Okay.
if you ask
Sure.
for permission from everybody on your committee.
Oops. Yeah, that would be fine.
Rule 1. Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan is just asking for the link to
Okay,
be
good.
forwarded.
You're sending it. I just saw it.
Yes, I'm just trying to.
Okay,
I'm trying to get it in my mail. Okay, I think
I got it. Should I
You
just?
got it. Go ahead then. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Claire, you're getting all the love from YouTube, just FYI.
Aw, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. You will be able to see the chat. If you need to look over, there's a bunch of people over there already wishing you well.
Oh,
Okay.
look at all these. What a lovely time to get to see all these folks.
Hi, Hyo. Thank you for coming.
Hello.
Hi. Lovely to see you here.
Hi.
I'm here.
Hi,
Hi,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
And welcome
Okay.
back to Pittsburgh.
Thank you,
Hi,
Nancy.
can you guys?
Oh,
Hey, Swati.
Hi,
Oh.
Jessica. Can you guys see me? And
can't see
Giuseppina.
I can now.
You're,
I
you're
can't.
dark, but I
Uh,
can see you. Your face is not lit. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go in another room, okay? Because this is not a great room. It's just a sec. I'll be on this. Here.
Okay.
Here she is.
Hi, Josephina.
Good.
Hi, Jonathan.
Okay.
Oh. So,
So we have
Okay.
present currently Swati and Hyo and Josephina and Nancy and Shalini and Claire and me. Is that everybody?
And Jess.
Where I haven't seen it.
I'm auxiliary. It's all good.
Anyway, so let me begin with a few words. We're here for a dissertation defense, which is something that we share with universities in the West for more than 1,000 years at this point. The defense is an occasion in which a newly emerging scholar gets to test, in the old days his, but nowadays, thank goodness, his or her work in dialogue with the, oh, Jess, yes, hi there, with the community of learning. We, present at this dissertation, are standing for the community of learning, and in particular, those of us who are charged with responsibility for making a formal decision about the defense that is about to take place have that responsibility on our shoulders. Claire, what an occasion, how wonderful to have your work to share. Thank you for offering it to the world to be defended. And in a few minutes, we're going to look forward to your oral presentation that's going to launch the actual defense. And that oral presentation is itself part of the very long tradition. In the old days, there wasn't necessarily a paper copy available for people. There was only the oral presentation. Mm-hmm. So before we hear you, Claire, those of us who are on the committee should have a couple of minutes to touch base by ourselves. I don't know exactly how the Zoom procedure for that works, but in any case, Nancy and Shalini and Josephina and I need a couple of moments privacy now, which we'll also need at the very end in order to confirm our formal role as approving the defense. So is there a way to do that?
Claire, are you okay to put us in a breakout room now?
I was trying to, let me see. Let me move Swati. Okay.
Yes. So we just clicked.
Okay, I'm gonna join, okay? Wait, is the breakout room for the committee?
Yes, because
Okay,
otherwise everything you said will be on YouTube. So yes, go to the breakout room.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to click join for the breakout room.
Okay.
Yes. Claire, did you set up 2 breakout rooms or just 1?
I set up 2 for you, Swati, Hyo, and I.
Okay. I just wanted to check. I was like, I'm not going to the breakout room until I make sure it's not the committee. Yeah. Do you want me to head there?
We don't have to
or do you want me
go.
to stay here?
I don't. No,
Yeah, we'll stay here.
It doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah. Okay. If you stay here, you can talk to people on YouTube. I think she probably went to the breakout
hello.
room.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, it says my
Can you see
internet
the
connection
comments?
is stable. No,
Oh,
I'm not
well,
even looking right
I'll
now
turn
because
off
I
the video
can't handle.
Don't even look. You can't handle. Okay. I was like, I can read you off. People, Brad and Lisa and Kirsten and Sandy and Thomas are all saying good luck and best wishes, and other people who probably don't feel like commenting but are still there. Yep.
Thank you all.
Lauren's there. All sorts of people.
Yes. I can. Oh. Okay.
Ryan. Yes, Swati, we know we're on YouTube. We're not saying anything gossipy at the moment. So we're staying here. But later on, we will go back to YouTube, I think is Claire's plan.
Oh, but we're still live streaming, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How's Amelia? Thank you.
Do you have tea?
I have a little bit of water. I didn't really need caffeine this morning too much.
That seems fair. Yeah.
I mean, I had some coffee with cream, but not the full cup.
Oh, Swati says you can let her and people back in when you're ready. I think Swati, you should be able to come back when you like.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But I don't know how.
Yeah, don't. I don't want you to accidentally pull the committee back before they're ready.
And they'll be able to just exit the breakout room when they want to, right?
That's what Nancy seemed to suggest. I'm going to
Okay.
ask Swati to be our guinea pig.
I'll turn my email on just in case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Sure.
Nancy also has power, so she should be able to pull them out
Okay.
because she's a co-host. Oh, digital communications.
I want to mute my my picture of myself so I don't look at myself. I don't like that. Hide. Oh,
Liz says hi.
I hope everything's going well over there. Oh, Ernan, can I ask a favor? Get me my power cord upstairs just in case I need it. It's at my desk. I forgot to plug in my laptop.
This is why you have people in attendance for real. Like, yep.
Yes.
Aha.
Oh, they're back. Okay.
Okay. I'm disappearing again. Have fun.
We're back.
Okay.
Claire, you seeing us?
Welcome. I am.
Are we all-
Okay, that's good. Reassuring.
We're out of quarantine now?
If only.
No,
Yes.
you'll forgive my bad hair day, you know. I even
Oh.
won in your honor, but it still looks awful.
Yeah, no, but thank goodness nobody looks awful today. We're all feeling.
No, it's true. It's true.
And it helps
Oh.
that Zoom pictures are small.
Yes.
So,
And then I'll have a PowerPoint up too, so that'll help.
okay, so we've now set the order in which the committee members will join one by one in conversation with Claire after she makes her presentation. Giuseppina Mecchia will go first in her role as the outside reader. Shalini, Nancy Glazner will go second. Shalini Khoury will go third. Jonathan Arick, although it's calling me Susan in the corner of my box because I've borrowed a computer, will be the last in that role. If there's time, as we certainly hope there will be, the others of you who have come to the event and may have questions or dialogic points to make will be welcome to join in too. We'll conclude by 3 o'clock, but with that proviso only, there's room for more conversation. So Claire, you'll begin with a presentation that might take as long as 20 minutes or might take a little bit less than that. Is that right?
Yes, hopefully a little less.
Okay, so it's your turn.
Okay, all right. Just a note before we start about the passage that I opened with. Let's share the. I will share what I make of it around midpoint in the opening remarks, so stay tuned. Okay, and then I'll close this for a second. So, Uneasy Fellowships. Well, certainly not ours. What a committee you have been, and what a luxury it has been to be in conversation with you. Thank you especially to Jonathan and Nancy for securing me the chance to persist in this meaningful work. Nancy for advocating on my behalf, and for emboldening me throughout this process to position myself as an expert in my field. And Jonathan for so genuinely sharing in my enthusiasm and for offering wisdom at certain crossroads along the journey. I want to thank my committee. The delight you brought to this project has encouraged me. Your compassion in cheering me on while I dissertated with a baby feels like a victory for integrating academic and family life. As your student, I have learned such a great deal from you. Your keen intellects, your warmth and kindness, reflected in your demeanors, the egalitarian vigor you bring to everything you do. Finally, I want to thank the department and my fellow graduate students, many now lifelong friends. On the 5th floor of the Cathedral of Learning, I found a stimulating place in which to grow, brilliant people to converse with, and discover my scholarly personality amongst. So many people have made this day possible. My thanks to all of you. And I'll just pull up the PowerPoint now. Okay. So let me offer an overview of Uneasy Fellowships, how it took shape, and my approach in engaging its topic, the modern sentimental subject and her affective spheres. I began this project wanting to study how the novel thinks generationally, how it imagines family relations across time. During one of our early conversations over what would turn out to be my first chapter, Jonathan suggested sentimentalism. This turned out to be a fortuitous reframing of my interests in relation to genre. The sentimental novel thinks in families. It approaches social ills by imagining what a mother's offspring will inherit. The sentimental novel also thinks about social welfare, primarily through the conduit of charity. As Nella Larson writes in the pages of Quicksand, even foolish, despised women must have food and clothing. Even unloved little Negro girls must be somehow provided for. Sentimentalism fits me constitutionally. I'm the type of person who tears up in greeting card aisles. At home, I like to read The Nation. To engage a critical project for any sustained amount of time, I need to see a thread of hope running through the texts I am analyzing, and it can be a small thread. Studying sentimental writing and theory across 3 centuries proved challenging. I found out that affect theorists and scholars of sentimental studies don't usually move in the same circles, even though they work within the same broad field of emotion studies. I learned to define terms for myself, choosing to treat affects, feelings, and emotions on a continuum where affects are the least articulable and most closely biological, and emotions are the most socially constructed and cognitively developed of the 3. We live in an age that privileges affect, an age where neuroscience has seized authority from philosophy. A recent article in Psychology Today claims an emotion lasts 90 seconds, unless we fuel it with our stories. The author credits brain scientist Jill Bolte Taylor with this information, but he might just as easily have cited the counsel of Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. It is not things themselves that disturb men, but their judgment about things. Emotional response bears an ineliminable narrative element, and the stories we attach to such emotions often carry undeniable human consequences. Literature captures this process. It allows us to contemplate the gap between a character's circumstances and her reactions at a blessed remove. As I worked on tracing the complex intellectual history of sentimental literary form, I moved from an emphasis on filiation to affiliation, articulating the worldliness of sentimental texts, tracking how they are located materially in the world and how they express the political realities of their moment. I also began a lexical archaeology of emotion across centuries, starting in the 18th century with the moral sense philosophers of the Scottish Enlightenment, and continuing into the present with affect theory, graphing the import of this shifting language of emotion for our shared cultural life. Common usage today, for example, understands empathy as an improvement on an older form of sympathy. In our time, we acknowledge that a capacity for empathy relies not only on a willingness to step into the shoes of another person, but the ability to step away from ourselves. The modern sentimental subject cannot always do this. In contemplating her, I began to think of empathy as a privilege. As the authors in my study reveal, empathy becomes nearly impossible when food, clothing, and shelter needs go unmet, when safety is denied, or love and a sense of belonging are absent. Any project on sentimental literary theory worth its salt must contend with sentimentality. Sentimental texts are as present an element in our time as in the antebellum period when Uncle Tom's Cabin was outselling the Bible. Sentimentality registers the social and political impact of the literary. As when President Lincoln, upon meeting Harriet Beecher Stowe, exclaimed, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this war." Films like The Help and The Butler, or genres like the terminal teen romance, keep sentimentality alive and open to criticism. Until the 1980s, sentimentalism as a subject was often considered soft or not serious. Anne Douglas and Jane Tompkins changed this. Douglas, by being the first to discern how the 19th century's culture of sentiment influenced mass culture, namely American religious culture, its clergy and their homilies, and Tompkins by criticizing sexist bias in the literary canon and making a bid for the sentimental novel's canonical might. Most scholars uphold Tompkins' thesis over Douglas's, but I think this is partially a mistake. Sentimental power carries a certain allure, while a study steeped in Calvinist doctrine does not. Douglas's dissatisfaction with the sentimental turn taken by American mass culture offers a useful blueprint for connecting sentimental ideologies in the 19th century America to a broader national culture today. Recent studies follow Tompkins in connecting sentimental power to the formation of empires and the early American Republic. Scholarship of this stamp names sentimentality's political failures rather than pondering its vision. A cultural studies approach to American sentimentality holds the potential to illuminate certain structuring dynamics within our foreign policy, as well as challenge a prevailing national self-image, the notion that we are somehow different from Britain. I am talking about the disturbing reality of US actions as a global superpower. Borrowing the words of American theologian and activist Reinhold Niebuhr, a retired Army colonel, Andrew Bacevich, asks, what would it mean to toss aside the garnish of sentiment and idealism, the halo of moral sanctity, to disenthrall ourselves from the self-aggrandizing parable in which we cast America as liberator of the world's oppressed? The religiosity of the American people invests political causes with sanctity. This tendency to equate our political with our Christian convictions causes politics to generate idolatry, as Niebuhr clearly apprehended. This study of sentimental history opens the door to broader understandings about the persistent significance of the South's lost cause narrative, as well as the increasing power of evangelical conservatism in American politics. As John Adams perceived, power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak, and that it is doing God's service when it is violating all God's laws. And in terms of the 18th century moral sense philosophers, we have nurtured a national sentiment that has proved terrifyingly blinding. In the terms of the sentimental novel, we have lost our self-awareness. The novels I study are not typically classified as sentimental. They play sentimental form in a minor key, and in so doing bring life into focus, not as we wish it would be, but as it is. The first novel in Marilynne Robinson's Gilead series assumes the form of a long letter written by Reverend John Ames to his son. Dying of a heart condition, he writes in earnest and against time, full of wonder for the world, feeling somehow more alive than he has ever been. Life sharpens under such conditions. In the sentimental novel, such sharpening transfixes the reader in the form of tableau, framed scenes poignantly rendered. This old 18th century technique gains significance when authors begin to focalize tableau through the central consciousness of a character whose vision shapes narration. Beheld by a specific consciousness, tableau assumes new complexity. Tableau encapsulates a specific form of being in the worldness. Neither icon nor symbol, tableau does not turn away from history. Tableau resists abstraction by anchoring the perceiver in particular moments in which life's transience and fullness comes into sublime relief. Arrestingly felt, then recollected in tranquility, tableau touches on peak experiences of near mythic vision, sustaining and heartening the beholder in times of difficulty. This compact tableau, one of my favorites in Gilead, radiates life's simple yet extravagant splendor. It has to do with the rain, and it has to do with young lovers. It discloses the value found in loving deeply, the forgiving and creative spirit that graces and expands lovers of any age, and the social vitality love forges in widening individual perception. Having studied passages like this one, I now describe the sentimental in a way that surprises me. Sentimentalism, like tragedy, renders life more poignant. Unlike tragedy, the sentimental provides hope in the face of death. Its vision of life offers romance, but departs from the arc of romance in making love's loss central to narrative meaning. Tragedy captures life's complexity through the framework of competing loyalties, between which a character must decide. Sentimentalism does something different. It situates competing loyalties within family ties, in scenarios where love wins over ideology. The sentimental shares romance's investment in reconciliation, but departs from romance with its insistence near plot's end on depicting the harder elements we face in living. In this aspect, the sentimental resembles what Caribbean scholars call anti-romance. Sentimentalism anticipates the romantic poet who opens himself to the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, then thinks long and deeply upon them. My choice of the adjective poignant in describing the sentimental evokes this two-part process practiced by many 18th century sentimental readers. First, the body is moved by a text, experiencing truths that are both piercing and touching. Then the mind is engaged in reflection. The sentimental is apt in this sense. in centering us on ultimate matters. At the end of Uncle Tom's Cabin, Stowe affirms this tradition when she writes, "There is one thing that every individual can do. They can see to it that they feel right." In this counsel, Stowe is connecting feeling to a specific form of judgment, a judgment that prioritizes moral inquiry in the face of life's brevity. In writing his sons' begats, as Reverend Ames calls them, Ames takes account of his life. He celebrates the immanent and the earthly while retaining the searching honesty, the examination of conscience we might expect from a New England Puritan at her desk. Think Anne Bradstreet and To My Dear Children. Modern sentimentalism directs us to live fully and purposefully in the form we judge fit. Its form is open, not didactic. Sentimentalism holds more sophistication than the majority of us would assume. Sentimentalism sees the promise of community as beginning with the individual, that social unit most capable of modulating the passions for the greater good. Sentimentalism works to produce readers who are moved by emotion, but not caught in its thrall. In bringing the rational mind and emotions together, it begets wisdom. In the modern and contemporary novel, I see the sentimental mode as both an emergent and a residual form. By this, I mean that the form has undergone a renewal beginning around the Harlem Renaissance. Refreshed, it offers new resources for meeting contemporary problems. I've just recounted the theoretical framework of my study. As a scholar, I work closer to the ground. I think with and through the specific details I find in the novels I study. I think about the historical conditions to which they gesture through thick descriptions of felt experience. These novels helped me imagine the sentimental in different terms, less an abstract category to judge than a poetic form I needed. Literature is equipment for living, as Kenneth Burke claimed, which means it equips us for living in the modern world, and it equips us for loss, even disaster. I take up this last topic in an epilogue that asks for resources, what resources the sentimental might provide under our current circumstances. In chapter 1, I explore how sentimentalism and affect theory provide the sentimental subject with different sets of tools. The sentimental subject wields affective agency with skill. By this, I mean she can usually work a room. She's a quick study, the modern sentimental subject, and grasps sentimental political storytelling's power to supply relief, whether financial or social. Her agency in such settings does not necessarily grant her the comfort of the self-assured, nor does it lead to self-awareness of the kind sentimental reflection imparts. Chapter 2 applies these distinctions to Nella Larsen's first novel, Quicksand. It analyzes the habits of mind of Helga Crane Larsen's fiercely intelligent, emotionally volatile protagonist. Larsen portrays Helga's inner life with a range that parallels Dvorak's New World Symphony. Vacillating between ironic and sentimental modes of response, Helga finally gives in to the affecting strains of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming forth to carry me home. I discuss how a critic might read this act of submission as a triumphant move to self-actualize, a brave, because risky, unmistakably deliberate choice on Helga's part to respond to sentimental feeling rather than flee from it. In chapter 3, I found sentimentalism's stoic logic and its cosmopolitan context. I explore Claude McKay's allusion to the Caribbean coffee crises of the 1830s and 40s in his third novel, Banana Bottom, published in 1933. This episode explores the entwined relation of the emotional and economic in colonial Jamaica, positing it as a significant background for the protagonist Bidda Plant's journey into self-mastery. Banana Bottom ends on a scene of introspection, with Bidda sitting alone in her parlor, contemplating a passage from Pascal's Pensées. This scene represents her shrewd, hard-won grip on her place in this world, her voyage into community, not her escape from it. Chapter 4 discusses Marilynne Robinson's novels in relation to her essays. By imagining what it might mean to be a good Samaritan or embrace a prodigal son, her writing works to replace a broken parable of American exceptionalism. Through the practice of visionary tableau, Robinson's Gilead novels offer a more expansive Christian ethic many in her audience find browsing, especially as an alternative to evangelical conservatism. By reframing the sentimental, Uneasy Fellowships opens up new perspectives on old cultural antagonisms. At the end of this phase, I have a better sense of the kind of interventions I wish to make were I to turn this into a book. In bringing conservatives like Irving Babbitt and Adam Smith into conversation with Larson and McKay, perceived social challengers, I see now that I am after a dialogic understanding, a meaning that emerges when cultural communities come into conversation. Working on a book manuscript would give me an opportunity to test this critical sensibility, a style I outline in an appendix. This style, what I am calling a dialogic poetics, could be developed by better examining certain keywords latent in my work, by exploring the interplay between individualism and sentimentalism, worldliness and introspection, self-mastery and affective agency, and filiation and affiliation. Familial seems a misunderstood term, whether it signifies a family of texts, think Harold Bloom's Anxiety of Influence, or a family of people, those rebellious sons of Gilead. Edward Said calls Louis Bonaparte's masquerade as Napoleon an affiliative repetition and a methodological revolution. But Robinson shows no masquerade is needed, because even in Gilead, what Karl Marx says is true. Life repeats in order to produce difference. I hope you heard me already starting to respond to your questions in these opening remarks. Shalini, a year ago, you said you hoped I might think about my work's relationship to tragedy and romance. And that same day, Josephina, you asked, who is the sentimental subject? I've been so grateful for your questions and I'm eager to exchange once more. Thank you. Sorry if it was a little long.
Well, it's fine. We're full of thoughts, and Josephina is going to start us off.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. Okay, so thank you very much for making me part of this project. It has been a joy throughout the years, and I was delighted to read this. So my questions really are really not difficult, like, you know, maybe, but I didn't start answering them yet, so I feel I can still ask them. I'm sure you're going to, I mean, I don't know. So they're simple questions, they're real questions, okay? So the first one is that there is a lot of her and she in your treatment of the subject. And it seems to me that even a cursory understanding of what happens in your novels sort of pushes me to ask you this question. To what extent do you think that the sentimental novel has been a way for women to be somehow more represented in the literary world?
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Sentimental, a vehicle for her.
Mm-hmm.
Even when the writer is a man, like Claude McKay. I mean, to what extent is the sentimental novel a place of appearance?
Okay.
the female subject.
Well, first I would pair the Claude McKay and his female protagonist, Biddle,
Right.
with the female author of Robinson and her protagonist of Ames. So I do think that there is a huge and long tradition of the sentimental man. But I think that with Sister Carrie at the turn of the century, and maybe even, Madame Bovary before that, we have this female character that is gaining a kind of social mobility, partly in relationship to certain historical changes, like consumer culture with Madame Bovary, and with Sister Carrie, she's a mistress in Chicago and becomes an actress. So I'm not necessarily saying, oh, look at, the socially mobile woman and all of her upward mobility. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a woman in this time period has experienced a range of different settings that somehow just seems to be much greater than what, say, Charlie Druitt's experiences, or even Hurstwood and Sister Carrie. So for me, it gets back to the Richard Hogarth beginnings of cultural studies, where you have this figure like a scholarship boy who is a boundary crosser. He's moving between classes and groups of people, and in that movement, and that's what I think the sentimental subject is getting at in the modern period, there is this kind of opening across experiential realms and across cultural groups. And I think the first generation student on our college campuses represents that kind of figure right now. And I think it's a challenge for us as educators to meet her and him. They're both genders. But I guess I would just say that the female positionality in the modern period is a really attractive one that I'd like to explore more as I continue to, develop this project.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question only because, maybe I'll ask then a sort of a corollary question. I'm not gonna let you go just yet. So you just mentioned Madame Bovary, right? That's a novel that has never been defined as sentimental.
No.
And a lot of things have been said. I mean, I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm just saying that that is not a novel that has ever been defined as a sentimental novel. And Madame Bovary, one would have a hard time, although, yeah, she has social mobility up to a certain point, but it would be hard to consider her a sentimental subject, or even, and the novel in general, it would be hard to put into a family, yeah, there is the story of a family, but it's definitely not the sentimental version of it. So I guess the corollary version, right, is I'm still, so the corollary question would be why, so on the first one was, I'm still not sure that you answered, is there a gendered public, a gendered, even some of your scholarship, talks about the feminization of American culture. I find very interesting, right? So there is still the issue of the gender.
But it starts with Uncle Tom. I mean, Uncle Tom is feminine, and according to Dan Douglas.
Right. So then there is a corollary question, which would be, what's the difference, let's say, between the subject of a realist satire, in a way, like Madame Bovary, and a sentimental novel? I mean, maybe it's not a satire, but it's certainly an ironic take on sentiments and feelings, right? And what would be the difference between that kind of a novel and a sentimental novel? Because you never define it. You never say, okay, these are the criteria by which I'm going to say that this is a sentimental novel.
Oh, yeah. And I would never say
the
Madame
gendered issue, and another issue is the genre issue, which is, I still am not sure that I've read a definition of the sentimental novel.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. These are honest questions. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, and I say they play it in a minor key, that they're not sentimental. And so I wouldn't say that Madame Bovary is. I wouldn't say even maybe that any of the novels in the Gilead series are outright. But, and of course, Sister Carrie isn't a sentimental novel, but it is absolutely in dialogue with the domestic sphere as being sentimentalized. So
Yes.
I guess that's where I'm not particularly wedded to the idea of saying the sentimental novel is the modern novel, or, you know.
Yeah, or vice versa.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm not, but I'm saying that this is not a question that has gone away in the modern and
Right.
contemporary novel. And I guess maybe I'm a little cagey about the gender question, because I don't want to, I think gender is partly a fiction in the same way race is. I mean, and I don't.
They're both highly represented in the sentimental novel.
Yeah.
They're both actually subjects of the sentimental novel.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I'm answering your questions, but I like.
That's okay. I don't. Yeah. I'm just bringing these things up. You might, when you revise this for publication, I suspect that your editors might ask you to engage a little more.
Like be more, have more.
Right, to be a little more, like, less cagey, you know. I love your dissertation. I'm just saying that an editor will probably ask you for some engagement with the issues that I brought up, and that's all I needed to say. Right.
Thank you.
Could I just say a word on the topic that, or at least one of the topics that Josephina launched? I do think, Claire, that you definitely are not trying to give us a genre theory of the sentimental novel. And maybe that's something that will need to be stated as a ground clearing gesture at some point. You're finding in sentiment something like a complex problematic that ranges widely in cultural products over several hundred years, and investigating it in several sensitive recent places. But none of the three novels that you, or none of the four novels that you address would be immediately genre categorized as a sentimental novel, nor did you intend them to be. And that's a very helpful dialogic clarification, I think, that Josephina has pushed us towards.
Thank you.
Maybe I would jump in to this point in particular, though, and say that right now, the way that Uncle Tom's Cabin is standing in for a sentimental tradition is, I think, why the issue gets muddied. That is, it might be that its role needs to get reframed or something, because I can see why the question arises, right? Even though you have lovely nuanced ways of talking about what the 20th century novels that you take up do, you know, that don't characterize them as just an extension, right? But Uncle Tom's Cabin keeps playing this interlocutor role that might raise the genre question.
I mean, also, I guess, the fact that do you hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'll say about that, or maybe it's just a rhetorical thing, Nancy, thank you for that. Because not only Uncle Tom, but also the whole tradition of the British sentimental novel is brought into the picture, right? So that it's not 100% clear that you're exploring sentiment without necessarily the genre, you know what I mean? So maybe, yeah, maybe it's just a rhetorical thing that might be addressed in a manuscript.
Mhm. Yeah. Nancy, I can't hear you.
Nancy,
We can't hear you.
Oh, I can.
Nothing yet?
Yes, now
Oh,
yes.
okay. I have no idea. I was definitely not muted. Okay, I'm glad I'm back. Okay, okay, just a second. I have to. Okay, can you still hear me?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So my true beginning place is that I wanted to say, you know, it was really, really a pleasure to read this dissertation. These are really eloquent readings, detailed, very nuanced. Your reigniting of the possibilities of the Stoic and 18th century philosophical traditions is really exciting. And the close readings, though long, and I suspect ultimately will end up getting compressed, right, are not boring at all. I mean, you know, there's just so much thinking and so much you know, really rich reading going on that it's terrific. So I wanted to thank you for all that. I think maybe in the spirit of taking up kind of the other half of the question Giuseppina raised. I mean, if Giuseppina was raising the what about sentimentalism as a novelistic tradition, I'm gonna home in on the sentimentalism as building on this moral philosophy and stoicism, and, you know, being a theory of emotions integrated with the intellect, right?
Mhm.
And involving discipline, valuing reflection, you know, having very kind of thoughtful ways of talking about how people manage their relationship to their own emotional lives.
Mhm.
So my questions, and you will recognize this tendency of mine, I'm going to ask you some in a nutshell questions, okay? Because you know, you talk about different topics in different places in wonderfully detailed and nuanced ways, and occasionally I'm not sure that they all line up, you know, and this often happens because sometimes you're at different phases in thinking when you're writing one chapter versus another. So about the Stoics and Adam Smith and 18th century philosophy, it seemed to me plausible that you were saying, in some sense, we have all we need in the way of a theory of the emotional life from them. You know, people later on misrecognized what they offered, right, or forgot things, but that, you know, really it seems like that's the center of value for you, and that you value later people insofar as whether or not they realize it, they're extending that same work. So I'm wanting to test that impression. I'm wanting to say, is that true, right? I mean, you know, understood richly and complexly, is that all we need? Or are there ways in which what we inherit from Smith and the Stoics, you know, is not fully adequate? And you know, are you aware of places where it's getting supplemented or adapted?
Okay, thank you for that question too, Nancy. I would say that no, that's not what I mean. I don't mean that we could stop living after the 18th century and all would be fine. I included a little bit of Kyla Schuller's work, I think in chapter 2, where I mainly discuss the Stoic tradition. And what I'd say is that all of this kind of work that she represents and others is very valued. So post 18th century work that says, hey, there's been a problem with self-mastery in the Western hemisphere that says that, you know, only civilized bodies can manage themselves, and only, you know, certain kinds of bodies can receive impressions and then cultivate good responses and understand the impressions they receive in the world. And so McKay is a big one. in this respect for talking about primitivism, and he's trying to correct that. So to me, I think Kyla Schuler's work is very important, and lots of other critics that fall under that category of saying, hey, there's been some disciplinary biopower stuff that's really, the 18th century thinkers didn't include, or it just wasn't in their moment. They're trying to talk about universal man, but there's the problem of slavery and colonialism, that's extending well past the 18th century. So my reason for seeming like such a cheerleader for the 18th century is because I think that the progressive politics of our century and the last has taken a wrong turn and leaving self-mastery behind. I think it's absolutely important that we as I shouldn't say we, like people that are invested in progressive politics think about the role self-mastery plays in creating constructive dialogue across political lines. And I don't think we've just, encountered this new episteme of affect where we all vote based on our gut and everything will be right with the world. So I do think self-mastery is an incredibly important concept to reclaim, and we shouldn't just treat it as some like really disgusting, dirty thing we have to throw out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, I need to probably correct the impression that you got from reading my dissertation. Maybe I need a little bit more balance in that to make it not seem quite so strong.
Well, part of what you're getting at is answering a further question. I mean, I do understand you don't think the world froze in 1800, right? But it has seemed as though another thing that seemed a little wobbly, as though you were in different places at different times, and now it feels like you're landing more firmly, right? Is, you say optimistic things early on about how you're going to bring affect theory and sentimental studies together, but it seems like you're seeing, and what you were just saying was headed in that direction, right? You're seeing affect studies as mainly a wrong turn, and that only people like Lauren Berlant, who are also kind of building on and recognizing the sentimental tradition, are doing the kind of work that you would value. So if that's true, I think that needs to be clarified, right? I mean, I have further questions about, I would see things a little differently, but it seems like you might be making a kind of polite, constructive, we can all play together argument in places, whereas in other places, you're really identifying affect with, soccer stadiums and political rallies. And it seems like it's the kind of, sensation, stimulus response, kind of low level to be mistrusted register.
Yeah, well, again, I don't want to create entirely that impression. Mm-hmm. So I do that at the beginning of my introduction, and I keep that kind of definition of affect to make a certain point. But I don't want to stay wedded to that idea. I do think a lot of affect theorists make really important points about how emotion is spread out across social groupings and in different experiential realms, like, I don't know. So I think my definition of sentimental is quite different from Lauren Berlant's. She thinks of sentimentality as a seduction that happens at the beginning of good political movements. Mm-hmm. I don't think of sentimentality as a seduction. I think, at least not in a good form. It's not, I don't know. I don't think of pain alliances as the main thing of sentimentalism, and Lauren Berlant does in her reading of Uncle Tom's Cabin. So I like Lauren Berlant's work, and I like so many affect theorists' work. And the reason there's probably a lot of wobbliness throughout this dissertation is because my head was spinning trying to figure out what affect theory is. So I'm not going to say politely that it was a wrong turn, because I don't think it was. Mm-hmm. I just think that there needs to be other turns made within it. And I don't even feel like I know affect theory enough yet. I still feel like I'm learning so much about it. And it was really a big struggle to write clearly about it as much as I could.
Giuseppina wanting to talk.
Just to interject a little comment about affect theory and then emotions and affects, just a little thing that brings me back to the issue of the literariness of what you're dealing with, because affect theory is really not situated in literature, it's not situated, it never, it has never served as a sort of a normer for an aesthetic movement, really. Like, you know, the sentimental novel has a certain literarity to it. Affect theory is really not wedded to any particular form, aesthetic form, right? That is a difference that you don't make in your dissertation, and even emotion. In other words, that the three words that you use, which is sentiment, affect, emotion, and sentiment, or affect, sentiment,
Feeling, emotion.
you really don't belong fully to the same epistemic and disciplinary domain. And I'm not sure that this is a comment that matters, but I think that to a certain extent that might kind of start defog some of the or yeah, that was the only comment I wanted to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, as you know, I find affect theory often perplexing, and you know, your mapping is one that I recognize and find really helpful. And I am aware of the place where you say, you know, I've been presenting it pretty negatively up to now, you know, in order to create a contrast, right? But when I ask myself, so what is it that the study takes on board from affect theory? It seems like you're mainly saying there are ways in which it doesn't recognize that it's still doing sentimentalism, and that those are the ways, you know, where people have thought in new historical moments or new contexts or added something, right? But that they're working out of that matrix. And that it sounds like insofar as affect theory itself is useful to you, it seems like it's mainly where you're talking about affective convergence versus genuine forms of fellow feeling, right? And affective convergence is cast as, it's very interesting what you do with it, right? Especially the link to kind of, you know, survival modes. But it sounds like it is, it often kind of converges with manipulativeness, right? The ability to read a room in order to see what are the supplies I need and how can I get them. So it does feel, if not at odds with the project of sympathy, at least, you know, such a preliminary form that it doesn't get onto the board very much, you know.
Can I say something back?
Please, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess one way I could try to work that out more is through actually discussing what the title means to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like Uneasy Fellowships to me means that democratic union really lies in taking on discomfort. So for me, I think affective convergence is something that happens when you feel acceptance. Like if you're in the Trader Joe's line and you get to the cashier, I feel like they're really good at doling out like this warm feeling. I don't know, there's something about, but to me, Uneasy Fellowships is like something we don't encounter because either we shop mostly only at Whole Foods or mostly only at Save-A-Lot. So for me, I guess I want to say in the service of a more dialogic poetics, like to keep us in conversation as a, you know, group of people living on the same like map, just to say that fellowship doesn't mean acceptance. It means trying to take on board really in good faith the views of somebody you really disagree with. And I guess why I get filled up whenever I give my opening gratitudes is because I really think that I could easily put on my CV that had a baby, earned a PhD, because there's such a lot of cross-pollination between those two things. Like having a baby in Central Ohio means that I'm often at the public library downtown. And that means crossing a border, you know, in the College of Worcester campus is the divide, where there's much more of a economic difference in downtown compared to uptown. And it means that I'm around a lot of Christian evangelicals. And I go to story time with them, and I go to their houses, and I'm in moms groups with them. And then just the other day, you know, I'm dealing with my uncle's loss. And so COVID-19 is very real to me. And this one girl that I, you know, have had a child with her essentially, and like our kids play together. She's part of it's called the Playground Patriots.
Mm.
And they go to the playground. And so then I'm seeing this whole new side of, which I didn't really encounter just being in a mom's group with her, of like what her views are about the Constitution and what her rights are for going on a playground. So I hope I haven't gotten too far afield from what I'm.
No, I and all that I'm really sympathetic to. Shalini asked in the chat whether that, Claire, you see affect theory as anti-cognitive, and that's my reading too, that you're understanding affect theory as kind of what people have when they haven't, affects is what people have when they haven't reflected on them. And I guess I would say the strains of affect theory that interest me more wouldn't line up with that, but I do recognize strains that would.
Yes, and I hope that I said at least a little bit of that in my introduction whenever I moved to characterize affect theory, is that they're interested in the crossings between those things, like that sensation and thinking are very much together.
Yeah, I can see that. I would say if you really feel that you are braiding these together, it would be useful to highlight what are the things that you're really taking away from affect theory. And, you know, that can happen even if you really are critical of some things, right? If you're not really taking anything away, and you don't have to, right? Then you've offered, you know, a framework, and an interesting one, for thinking about what are the shortcomings of this, you know, thing that has a lot of buzz around it and that's important to contend with. So it just feels to me right now as though you make moves like you're going to actually incorporate it, but the incorporation isn't marked for me, at least.
Yeah. I wonder if a chapter on Sister Carrie would help me fix that.
Sister Carrie helps everything in my view, but yeah. For the beyond, worth considering, right?
I would like it to be fixed, Nancy. I'm really happy to get this reflected back to me, but it doesn't make me comfortable.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, anytime you're taking on, you know, weighty, chewy topics, right? I mean, I'm asking you for nutshell versions, but not because I really believe anything is that simple, right? Just to kind of highlight some of the things that seem to me the most, you know, kind of like rich but hard to tease out. And there's tons of local clarity, but because you have so many nuanced takes on things, it's sometimes a little hard, you know, to kind of put together the where do I stand vis-a-vis affect theory or whatever. But it's not because it's muddy, it's just because you have so many dimensions in view, which is terrific, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I should probably move on and let other people speak. But yeah, I'm really interested in this and really enjoying it for all that. In fact, partly because I come at it pretty differently. And so, you know, hearing your framing of it is really quite stimulating.
Oh, okay, so Nancy, are you hearing me, Nancy?
Yes,
Okay, so you've concluded?
that's right.
And we go to Shalini now? Okay.
Hi, thanks so much for this work. Really enjoyed it. Was very happy to hear that I'd had a conversation about tragedy and romance with you, and we'll try to maybe not ask you questions about that, since those terms were, you know, I mean, they were very much present as I was reading. But maybe I could spin those questions a little bit. But I just wanted to say how much, in fact, and most of my questions will come out of this appreciation for the ways in which you talked about inequality and difference, and the need for discipline and rigor, and that kind of really delicate balance, which you actually talked about even now, between the dialogic impulse and the idea of uneasiness. So I really like that idea of dialogue, intention, which I think you capture with the unease. And so I was really happy to hear that the appendix sort of gestures towards some of the directions you want to take things, because I really loved the appendix and thought that it was where you kind of practice the kind of sympathetic reading that you see. So I feel like you make it your methodology, particularly in the ways in which you talk about kind of understanding authors in terms of their own preoccupations rather than just kind of hijacking them for hours. So I really appreciated that. So I have a few questions. I guess one of them has actually like three related sort of genre kind or narrative mode kind of questions. One has to do with the way you kind of described your work as talking about sentimentalism in a minor key. And I found that very interesting for two reasons. One is that I don't know if it was your intention to suggest by a minor key that it was in dialogue with a major key, whatever that shifting key might, whatever that shifting referent might be. But if so, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what it is that sentimentalism is usefully in dialogue with, like what other modes. And you've sort of gestured a little bit to it's like not tragedy, not romance. So, but talk about what sentimental fiction might be usefully put in dialogue or tension with. The other thing is throughout your work, and again, even in your reference today to the minor key, there's a lot of, you draw on music a lot. Oh. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit as to how it plays into or interacts with your literary analysis.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I wasn't really as attentive to the predominant scene of catharsis, or I guess what Ralph Ellison would call like that high consciousness that you get with catharsis in Quicksand in terms of music until I was writing my opening remarks. So I think it's absolutely significant that Nella Larson picked Dvorak as the symphony that Helga Crane listens to in Copenhagen when she's staying with her aunt and uncle. Mm-hmm. And that's the sound of Largo. You know, I almost wanted to sing I didn't. Sweet Chariot coming forth to take me home, but she wants to go back to Harlem to the Negro spirituals, and Harry Burleigh is the assistant that this Czech immigrant Dvorak picks. So you know what, in like 1890 or something, like I think that's amazing. So like Nella Larson is, and to go back to her biography, she is the child of a Danish immigrant. You know, Dvorak is a Czech immigrant, and her mother she's involved with a Afro-Caribbean man from the Danish West Indies, right? So I just think there's an amazing parallelism there in terms of her musical reference. And I love that. And so I think Harry Burleigh is a significant person to think about when you think about that scene in Quicksand. And you also asked, what is it useful to put the sentimental intention with or in dialogue with? So in terms of a major key and a minor key, I am going to go back to an affect theorist, and I think Sedgwick is important here because from my first chapter, I say she opens a window in affect theory, and she talks about the difference between sentimentality as a spectacle, which is what, you know, Stowe gets dismissed as. She says we're getting all these violent vignettes in Uncle Tom's Cabin, and those are just sensationalism, which I completely disagree with. And then, so that's sentimentality as a spectacle. And Adam Smith, he says, you know, the brother on the rack, and let me see if I can find, I'll just project this again. If I can find the Zoom thing. But I think this is important to think about when you think about, and I think affect theory is giving us this not sentimental studies. So Adam Smith says, though our brother is upon the rack, as long as we ourselves are at ease, our senses will never inform us of what he suffers. So this is sentimentality as spectacle, the brother on the rack. And the people that are viewing it are at ease. Like the vanilla audience in that cartoon I showed. And there was this moment when I was writing, I forget, I guess it must be the McKay chapter, and Jonathan said, do you stand by this judgment? It's wrong, or something like that in the margins. And it just, I never even asked you, Jonathan, what you meant. I just made up my own interpretation of what that was. But so Jonathan was raising my, a question around how I interpreted this small story that Claude McKay includes in his 1937 memoir. And so he's going to Moscow for the, what is it, the fourth Comintern? He's going to be treated like, you know, this movie star there. But he's on his way and he's passing through Germany and the Treaty of Versailles had been signed. And he asks this waiter for a cup of coffee with cream. And the waiter says, we can't even give our children milk. Like, how are you asking me this? And to me, that's so evocative of like how I feel I'm experiencing this pandemic with my friend who wants to put her child on a carousel. So like, I just think that, yeah, we have, and Booker T. Washington is really good about this. He's thinking about the instructors that teach at Tuskegee for him. And he says, oh, look at these graduates and their nobility of serving the poor and devoting themselves to teach at my institution. But have they made a systematic study of the actual conditions that our students are coming from? And again, I just turned to the first generation student again, and just like the interface between different cultural groups that you get at a liberal arts college and how important that is. But to go back to what Jonathan said about my draft, I was saying, oh, look, you know, and this is again, maybe my misinterpretation of affect theory, but I was like, oh, McKay's talking about this punch to the gut he got at being embarrassed about asking for a cup of coffee with cream on this nice dining car. Well, I don't even know if it was nice, and I guess it wasn't segregated like the ones that, you know, how the crane travels through in quicksand. But and I said, look, yeah, sometimes you just need to experience something to actually end up finding yourself having empathy. And you know, yeah, that's not right. Like I was just having this text conversation with my sisters and my mom said something like, oh, you just don't know until you've traveled there, like speaking of her time in Togo. And I was like, that's not true. Like, I haven't been to Africa and I still have, you know, educated myself about certain aspects of certain, you know, countries there and what their economics are and things like that. So I think that sentimentalism and affect theory are both really engaged in this very complicated question about how do we think ourselves into the shoes of another person. And I do think that, you know, affect theory is way more complex than to say it's just all about the gut. And I think that if I would turn back to affect theory, I think it's a very important resource for understanding what somebody like Claudia Rankine's doing in a book like Citizen. So I think it's way more complicated than I've actually probably given it credit for. But honestly, this journey of writing this dissertation has been so disorienting. And it's got, I don't have the intellectual history background that I wish I would have to encounter so many of the texts that I did. And I read these.
Now, you've just given yourself that.
I just, like, I was listening to so many people and being convinced by so many people that would say they disagree with each other. So I'm still like making sense of all that as I write my own clear position. But I think, yeah.
Can I just put one word in on affect theory and Eve Sedgwick as that category and that personal name interacted in the recent exchange. But by the way, Claire, I still have your screenshot. Is it? Yeah, thank you. That is, I think that Eve Sedgwick is probably the most important critic of my generation. I don't think of her as somebody, when I hear affect theory, I don't think Eve Sedgwick. When I hear Eve Sedgwick, I think an extraordinarily comprehensive and powerful thinker who, of course, intersects in important ways with a movement called affect theory. But so this isn't explaining anything too much, except to say that you could readily give a crucial role to an important critic without committing yourself to a movement. Other people may not agree with that. I don't know.
No, I loved the places where you talked about Eve Sedgwick, and I would have loved to see her more fully in the conversation, for what it's worth. May I just make a follow-up comment?
Of course.
Claire, when you were talking about what I see as, the heart of what you're trying to do, which is like using sentimentalism to think oneself into the shoes of someone else versus the kind of spectacle model of it. You talk about that in relation to theater, in relation to tableau, in relation to theater, in relation to Brecht, and the idea of, and sort of problematizing the idea of catharsis. And so I just wondered if you had been thinking at all about Augusto Boal's work, because he comes out of a very different tradition in theater of the oppressed, but he has this idea of the spectator, right? Which is by which a spectator who watches this kind of theater becomes an actor, right? And so that the idea is that the theater would incite not just the characters to action and not just the spectator to knowledge without action, but it makes of the spectator an actor. So it seemed to me that your goals and desires in relation to sentimentalism are very closely aligned with that.
Oh, thank you. I don't know his work.
Well, read it sometime.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, when you were describing the tableau in particular and the work it does, I as well as in those discussions with Brecht, whom Boal faults precisely on grounds that, catharsis doesn't translate into action, and, whose catharsis, whose insight, whose life changes, right? So, yeah, I could imagine it being useful as you think about distinctions from tragedy and so on. Do I have time for another question?
Yeah.
I guess there's let me see, how do I put this? So I really appreciated your unwillingness to let go of the idea of autonomy, right? And there are a lot of very powerful critiques that are made of Enlightenment models of subjectivity. And I think that the way you use the word autonomy is quite distinct. But I think today when we were talking, you were also using the word self-mastery. But I'm trying to think about this in relation to conversations in part about romance and tragedy, but also, there are ways of thinking about, critics have talked about how people often tend to think about African American literature either in terms of narratives of damage and trauma,
Mhm.
or in, you know, like there are these different tendencies, one that kind of privileges narratives of damage and trauma, and which can actually get spectacularized in really problematic ways. And on the other hand, narratives that kind of reach for survival, resilience, creativity. And I'm wondering if you could situate your efforts in relation to that framework at all. And again, I see that kind of tension, like what I see in the way you're trying to approach sentimental fiction is this kind of split down the middle and holding two ideas in tension.
Mhm.
And so in this instance, I'm wondering what the relationship is between your investment in autonomy and navigating that landscape between reading for trauma and reading for survival.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, I guess, let me think a few seconds.
Yeah, no, take your time, really. Yeah.
Well, part, I guess, of the investment I have in autonomy is that I want it to give me a ground on which to stand to be countercultural. And I don't entirely think that means practicing in oppositional politics. Like I like the end goal of oppositional poetics, like Erica Hunt would have described it when she came to our campus probably 5 years ago. But I guess I want to pull it a little more toward a dialogic poetics. So I guess for me, autonomy or, you know, individualism could be in there too, but not a separating one, not one that excludes collectivism, but just a place to find a voice that you can listen to that isn't the dominant one in the cultures you move in. And so I think narratives that take on damage and trauma and narrativize those very real things in our world. Yeah, that it's difficult to do that well without going toward the spectacular and making it something that's like a voyeurism. And I guess I turn to Maslow's hierarchy of needs too, because I think there's a really difficult tightrope walk you do, and this gets at all Baldwin's, like, Everybody's Protest novel is about, it's a ballad to the individual to say, hey, if we're making good stories as authors, we have to write individuals. We can't just write this victim that doesn't get known, that a reader can't encounter. So I guess I love Quicksand because Nella Larson gives me a person who I want to be friends with. Like, I want Helga Crane to be my friend. But she doesn't have a friend in the story. Like, Anne Gray comes close, but she's a frenemy, you know? So like, so it's so complicated to give stories that are true to what being in the world means for a lot of people on this planet, and still give their person. And I think Earl Lovelace is amazing at that. Like, he's just like so fantastic. I wanted to write a chapter about him, you know, and Baldwin together. So I don't know if that helps.
No, you know, it's just, it does help. It's very interesting. And it's always interesting to me when so there's an assignment I've done with students where they have to kind of change some details and change the conclusion of a story. And it's always really interesting to me to see who kind of intensifies it and for maximum artistic impact, and who just wants to be kind to the characters and give them a slightly easier day. You know?
Yeah.
And I feel that that's an everyday example of those two critical impulses.
Mhm.
Well, I have a last. Oh, sorry, Jasmina, you want to say something?
No, I had a small comment. I think that Shalini's question and then the discussion you guys are having sort of goes also in the direction of another interesting aspect that your dissertation sort of brings up, and also the way that you talk about it. Which once again, I guess it's a subject of that is tied to the literariness of the sentimental works that you are studying, which would be, because who's the subject of the sentimental is also, it's that I asked in the days, it's not only the subject in the novel, but it's also the subject of the sentimental affect as reader, right? In other words, how does a sentimental novel constitute a new subject, which you talk about a little bit, like, it's like it's an issue of readership, right? And who read Richardson versus who's reading Gilead? You know what I mean? It's like that another way to approach the issue of the sentimental, both as residual and emerging, right? Which was very good thing that was really well done. Is also an issue of saying, how is the sentimental, to me, I would talk about it as a genre, but you don't have to, or as a mode. How does it constitute new publics, like new subjects, social subjects created by the experience of reading the novel? Because I think that is part of what you want the sentimental, what you think that the sentimental is doing for you, right? This is what it did for you. Like it created, a new community of readers, and right. I mean, it's a comment. I mean, it's also an issue that you don't address, the issue of the public or of the audience, but it could be broadened.
I do it a little bit, just like very nestled in my reading of Helga Crane as a stereotypical. But yeah.
Yeah. Was somebody saying something?
Well, maybe if there's time afterwards, we could come back to it. I feel like I've asked a couple questions. I'm curious. I have another one, but I can wait and see if there's time.
Why don't you just state it briefly and let Claire forbear answering until we see later if there's time.
Sure. That sounds good. I love the way you make connections to, the current moment, Black Lives Matter. And so I couldn't resist asking another kind of connective question, which is, which the defense is both an ideal and a very difficult moment for, because it's a kind of stand back question. But the stand back question is, if you talk about the sentimental as a way of thinking about, or as a way of expressing and exploring and developing imaginative love for people we don't know. So the question that I had is, what are the resources that sentimental fiction might offer for Anthropocene thinking? Oh, Jess is nodding. Jess is not. I knew Jess would like that question.
I was going to.
So, Claire, if you want to answer it very briefly, do it. Otherwise, you're entitled not to.
Totally. Yeah, I'll wait. I don't know.
Okay.
I have to think about it more.
All right. I'm very grateful to my fellow committee members for having had so many good questions, and even though, Claire, you evoked a shocking moment on the page where I asked you rudely,
No, no.
I'm actually now really just going to say how very happy I have been not only to have seen the work that eventuated in the dissertation that we've read, but the further work that led to the presentation that we just heard today, which you're certainly as aware as we are, does represent in quite an unusual and commendable way, continuing to push your thinking forward, even at the last moment. But it's, of course, not the last moment. That's one of the wonderful things about a dissertation defense. There's so much more that lies ahead, and you've given us very great grounds for thinking warmly, positively, appreciatively, and I'm sure I speak for everybody, dialogically going forward with your thinking about this. The remark you made a little while ago about, lacking the intellectual historical training that would have allowed you to do what you did. That is, in fact, you have done very serious intellectual historical work. It's much, much superior to most of what people do in dissertations. You've given hundreds of years of depth to a subject that could readily and legitimately have begun in the 1920s and come up to the present, and that would still be a century. So I actually had begun to think, oh, maybe in fact, back in the old days, you used to be an intellectual historian. Because, when I first encountered you in seminar some years ago, I was impressed, as I continue to be in this dissertation, people have remarked on it already, that you have a wonderfully crafted discipline of critical analysis as a writer. You're really good at finding striking, pregnant, deeply thoughtful, critical characterizations of key moments in the texts that you're studying. We don't often think of that. It's not just a gift, it's a trained capacity. We often think of that as not going with being able to tell a big story too, in which you necessarily give fairly short shrift to a lot of things. But you found a way of making very meaningful the things that you gave sort of short shrift to. And that's a great accomplishment. So the potential for a very significant book is here. And I think but I'm sure based on the conversation, every one of us would like to think about your wishes for it and what we can do to further those wishes. I also, you in your initial remarks, gave thanks to the environment provided by your fellow students. And we have some of those fellow students here. I think that what you have shown us already speaks very well for the conversational environment of you and your peer interlocutors. That is, that your friends let you write this dissertation speaks very well for your friends too. And I know that before we leave, I would love it if Jess or Hyo or Swathi chose to use the little bit of time that we have, a couple of minutes each if you want to put something on the table.
I'll also just mention we're soliciting YouTube now. who would like to? Swathi, Hyo, do you have things at the ready?
Not a question, but just a comment about how, so Elizabeth has this word or phrase actually for Clare. She calls Clare a walking annotated bibliography, because that really is, I mean, it's impressive how she has all these like succinct quotes and summaries of all these different, like the intellectual history behind her every thought at the ready when you ask her something. So just and even today I continue to be impressed by it. And yeah, that's all I have to say today.
Oh, thanks, Swathi.
Hyo, do you have one, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I don't really know about this sentimentalism and affect theory or any of those texts that you mentioned. So I just gonna ask what I'm interested. So like, I'm curious about like a sentimentalism or the representation of a sentimentalism are translatable. So, like these are like, you kind of investigate these texts into the American context, but I wonder if these texts were translated into any other broader readership into different language. So what kinds of like effect, can we expect, or do you have any examples? Like, because when I was listening to your presentation, I was thinking about the Uncle Tom's Cabin in Korea, early 20th century, and then it was a huge in Korea. Like people sympathized with this like black slaves because they were the colonized people, so they kind of like really like sympathized with the mother and child and slavery, all these things. So my question is like, how do you think about this global leadership in terms of sentimentalism?
Oh, that's awesome. I really like that question. I do know that Robinson's novels are translated into a bunch of languages, but I don't know the reception. But to just take your example, which is just so thought-provoking, and I'll just apply it again to where I don't mean to negatively characterize this aspect of affect theory, but identifying with the mother and child in Uncle Tom's Cabin, Eliza and her son Harry, I say is in some ways identifying with like this impersonal category, like impersonal in the sense that we all fall in love. And in some way that's an impersonal category and it crosses cultures. I much prefer that version of sentimental uniting than uniting under sentimentality as a spectacle. So if we could harness the impersonality of sentimental categories like mother, child, and falling in love too, because that was an example from my presentation, like, and think about them as impersonal categories. To me, that's the real mind-bending thing to do. And I'm not as familiar with Masumi's work as others, but it's like he says we don't get abstract enough with the way we think about human connections. And to me, something about Uncle Tom's Cabin's appeal across cultures, in the same way it seems Marilynne Robinson has an appeal across cultures, like harnesses that connectivity that impersonality gives us. If that makes any sense at all. I don't know.
Yeah. So Shalini brought up the Anthropocene.
Yeah,
I'll give you a couple different scopes and scales to maybe consider. During our grad school time, we've spoken a lot about being on the ground, right? What it means to be actively engaged, and how that can and can't kind of find itself both in like a classroom setting, but also, and I really appreciated the fact that you brought up some like, daily discourse examples in your talk today, in our everyday interactions. And I think the Anthropocene and climate change is one of those big, insert pun here, hot button, right, topics where I think your version of sentimentalism could offer us maybe new ways of engaging with each other and with topics that maybe we don't want to. But I was just curious if you felt inclined to speak more, again, in like a classroom arena, where you might have hopes, right? You can also disagree that you're suggesting a mode of practice. I'm just very excited. And I'll just mention, from a couple of people on the YouTube thread chat, they see connections to your previous undergrad learning, but also really picking up on the idea of equipment for living, right? So kind of connecting this to equipment for living. You can speak at a species scale if you'd like, or at a more pedagogic arena. But also just thank you. That was very generative.
Oh man, I don't know. I still don't know how to answer the Anthropocene question too well. I can't, I do think that thinking about environmentalism and the way it draws on the romance and the way it positions itself oppositionally or not, there could be something sentimentalism has to say about that. But there's the Savage Heart, maybe this writer who writes for the Atlantic. I can't remember his name. He has things about this, but again, I'm being pedantic. That's the bad part of walking annotated. It's not helping the conversation, so I'll wait. But the Overstory is something my dad's reading right now, and I think that could probably have some reading about what it means to stay up in a tree.
Yes.
I think there's a scene where they're squirting some sort of horrible pepper gas up some guy's leg in the Overstory, and that's more spectacle, but I think it has a range of references that bestseller right now. I don't know. Sorry, Jess.
Thank you. No, that was great. Biting off a little piece is all anybody can do with a global event.
I mean, the Overstory is very much about imaginative community building.
Exactly. Right.
So I think that we're at a point where the committee can withdraw into its withdrawing room and reach the decisions it has to make, and then come back and report them to Claire and to the assembled multitude. Okay.
See you soon.
So give us our breakout again, please. Give her a breakout.
Whoops.
Okay.
Okay.
Whew.
Join it.
Did it work?
Yep, they're going. I will also go to the breakout room if you would like, so we can talk to you. And I'll just mention for the YouTube, everybody will be back, and that is when the announcement about Claire becoming a doctor or not, but we know how that went, will be happening. So stay tuned. Hello, I've been designated as the placeholder. I will be doing nothing exciting, but I'll also just mention for people on YouTube that I was taking screenshots of our chat so that Claire will have pictures of kind of her with her committee and, her with her audience as the comments were rolling in. So thank you for participating. And I will now sit here in silence with you guys. I don't even have a cat. It's sad. State of affairs. Oh, yes. Yes. Hello. I'm the placeholder. Claire went off to have
Okay.
fun conversations in a different breakout room, but they should be back momentarily.
Okay.
Okay.
Ooh,
Thank you for being the placeholder, Jess.
Yeah,
Yeah. I was.
we'll conceal our judgment until the defender.
Yeah, I was like, don't say anything. Don't. Oh man. I might join that breakout room and be like, get back here.
Good plan, because sometimes it can be hard to get back in.
oh my God.
Yes, it really is too bad. It would be great to go.
Okay,
off
they're
and-
coming. Oh no, did we lose Claire?
She's just making me wonder.
Well, Claire, are you back?
Yes, thank
Yes.
Oh, I can't see you.
All right. So Claire, I'm very happy
Ah, there
to
we go.
tell you that your committee is happy to approve your defense. We applaud you.
Brava.
And also that we have just determined to nominate the dissertation for the Eric Clark Prize, which
Whoa.
includes many areas of interest, you know,
thank you. That's,
cognate with yours. So we'll see what happens with that, but at least it's a judgment of our admiration.
thank you.
Yay!
Bravo.
Hooray.
It's
Dr. Clare Sigrist. Hooray.
Should we take a screenshot?
Oh,
Yes.
sure.
Oh,
Yes,
good
for
one.
sure.
Yeah.
Who's gonna do that?
Well, anyone can do
I
it.
don't know how to do it, so
Okay, is
I've
everyone
been
ready?
clicking some the whole time. If you all
Yeah.
pose. 3,
One,
2,
two,
1. Yay! Okay, that was one of them.
One with applause.
A little Emilio there.
Can we do one with applause?
Can we do one with the baby?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
Emilio!
3, 2, 1.
Emilio.
Okay.
Yay.
Emilio is so big now.
I know.
Yeah. Be careful, you know, don't put him in on those slides that your friends. I would
Right,
wait a little
no
bit.
carousels. No carousels. Oh,
Not
man.
a chance, Josephina.
Okay.
You know, because fellowships of feelings are good, you know, but in a certain distance.
6 feet.
a cognitive, like,
Okay.
All
So-
right.
Thank you again, Claire. We'll all be in touch with each other. Very good to
A quick
see you.
sort of like
Jess. and-
paperwork question. Should I send those 3 documents to you, Jonathan, or?
You sent those to me. Should I send them then to the committee? Is that the circulation model? Or should I be in dialogue with Jess about how to Jessie about how to do this?
And Jason.
I'll have to get back to him and ask. I don't know as well what to do here.
I think you just email everything to the people who need to sign things, right? And then we sign and it all gets registered in the final version.
Okay.
Here, go get that.
Okay.
All right.
okay, I'm gonna go, guys.
Well, this-
It was
Okay.
great to see you all,
Bye,
Claire.
bye.
Bravo.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Doctor.
Bye-bye.
Yay, congratulations.
So,
Claire, just a reminder, you have a
congrats.
whole YouTube thread of congrats.
Thanks, Jen.
Boy, I
Happy
really
reading.
wish you could be heading out to the porch right now. Of course, you're not all even in Pittsburgh, but it's too bad we don't celebrate.
Cheers.
Okay, cheers and
Exactly.
festivity.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Congrats, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, John.